So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. I have a special treat for you. We have a returning guest, Jon Gruda. So, I want to say thank you, Jon, for coming back on to talk to us all about, a few different topics, to be very fair. But it's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, good to be back, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you that don't know, who haven't heard any episodes of Jon's before, well, firstly, the first thing I'm going to say is obviously go back and listen to them. So some great insight on leadership specifically. But Jon is the Assistant Professor in Organisational Behaviour at Maynooth University in Ireland. And so today, and certainly over this session, I want to sort of dig into the concept of conflict, particularly conflict during change, because as you go through a change program, there is often issues that arise and areas where you might be working cross-team or with individuals that you may not commonly work with. So I guess that's the first piece, is that, in terms of the definition of conflict within an organisation, how do we define that? What does that look like?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question to ask oneself. What kind of conflict are we actually dealing with here? So whenever you're, when you're a leader of a team, or even if just as a team member, conflict is something we've all experienced. Conflict is pretty much all around us, and particularly so at work, where we do spend a considerable amount of time engaging with people who might not necessarily agree with everything that we have to say, and neither should they, frankly. Be quite boring otherwise. So the first question is absolutely the right one. What is conflict? And when we think about conflict, we need to be sure that we can differentiate between two main types of conflict. One of them being a task conflict, and the other one being a relational conflict. So a task conflict is the most prevalent types of conflict at work, which is very simply defined as you have a group meeting and there's differing opinions on what to do next. What's the next step? Maybe there's a few options on the table and we need to decide, should we go with option B or option A or option B? Let's just make it very simple, two options. And you say it's option A because, and you might have some arguments, and another person says, no, that's all wrong. We need to go with option B because, so and so. So what is important here is that to recognize that this is not a conflict that is a clash of personalities, or these people don't like each other, but this is about they differ in terms of how to proceed with this task, with this decision. And this is actually a good kind of conflict. So this is what you would like as a leader. If you have just a group of yes-sayers, basically, who say, oh yeah, let's go with that. That really encourages groupthink, and groupthink is, a really bad. It's a phenomenon with really some bad outcomes potentially, because it signals that you don't really care that much as a team member, or it could. So you go with what the group says or the majority says, like yeah, let's just do that, or it signals that you don't feel safe enough to openly, publicly disagree with what the group or the group majority thinks. And you don't want that, right, as a leader, particularly not when, like you were saying, Hannah, earlier, during times of change where there's a lot more uncertainty than usual. This only adds to it. You don't want to create an environment where not only a lot of uncertainty and we don't really know what's going to happen. Maybe the company is being bought by another company and they're trying to integrate it into the parent company. But on top of that, now we have all these decisions to make. Let's just go with whatever the group thinks is best. This is not the time to foster that kind of environment, or it's also not the time to foster an environment where people don't feel safe enough. They actually disagree, and it's like, but I shouldn't say that. I can't say that because I'll be disagreeing with my boss, or I'd be disagreeing with that team member who always dominates any meeting because they're a very social person, very extroverted maybe. But you might have some very good ideas, so you should speak up. But it is not. I don't want to say that it's on the employees. Say, well, she should have spoken up or she should have spoken up. It's their fault. No, it's who's responsible here, right? And it's the leader. So the leader sets the tone. So that's really a responsibility that we like to see leaders take seriously. And from the very beginning, when a group is formed or when a new team member joins, that this is reiterated, that this is a place where you feel free to disagree and feel free to disagree actively, engage with others, and only through conflict can we actually get to be a good team. I mean, I teach this to my students all the time. Most people, and executives including, they don't like conflict. I mean, who likes conflict, right? We would all like to see less conflict, particularly at work. So how can you tell me then that conflict is a good thing? Well, this type of conflict is a good thing, and only by getting, as a team, you need to have some level of trust. And with trust, I don't mean to trust your team members to take care of your children for an afternoon, but maybe, to trust them enough to want to engage in this group task and this group decision that has to be made. And that's a foundation that you need. That's a bare minimum. This trust that we will try to work together, right? Even if you don't know each other. The next level is conflict. As soon as you have some trust, as soon as you have some understanding that we're a group, we're a team, and we can talk about the differences between groups and teams, that's a different thing. We're committed and we need to work together. By the way, I don't agree with you fully here. So that's literally the next thing is conflict. And only the best teams are the teams that get through conflict. And the really long-term, high-performing teams are the ones that have learned how to deal with conflict, and they don't shy away from it. They fully embrace it, and to them it is not, something negative, but they recognize this is. Most conflicts are about the task. There are some conflicts that are personal or relational in nature, where you really cannot get along with another person. Just a clash of personalities. You really, as a team leader, the only thing you can do is try to keep these two people apart from each other as far away as possible, from each other, assign them different responsibilities and so on. But those are luckily very isolated cases. In the vast majority of cases, it's just people that care enough to say, no, I don't think we should do it this way. Let's look at it another way. So conflict is absolutely necessary. If you don't get through conflict, you will not have a performing team. It starts and it ends there.
So that's a really interesting perspective on conflict, because that's a very positive, especially with task orientated, that it's actually conflict's a good thing. Are there any types of task orientated conflict that aren't good? Because sometimes, and I guess just to follow that up, if conflict is such a good thing, why is it quite scary, to both feel it, but also give it? So, where are the challenges there?
Right. So maybe one example of a task which seems to invite a lot of conflict, but that is because of the nature of the task and how it presupposes to deal with conflict, which is brainstorming. Okay. So brainstorming is not a task where you think of, conflict. Like it's not a debate, it's not a discussion. It's like any idea goes. Let's just, throw them out there. So this is the traditional view of brainstorming, right? Which just doesn't work. I mean, it's very, very just bad. Like, stop doing it. And it's bad for several reasons. One of them being conflict, but it's bad because you are basically saying every idea is the same in terms of there's no bad idea, but there's plenty of bad ideas, right? So we know that. And then the other thing is it invites conflict because you're telling people you cannot actively disagree with an idea, because every idea is good. So just suppress whatever emotion you have that you really want to say. Like someone says, we should try that. And for a fact that the client doesn't want that. For example, you might have had that conversation, but instead of you being encouraged to say, wait, I've actually talked to the client and that's not going to work because they had some prior experience with another company and that just didn't work out for them. You are not allowed to say that because every idea goes. Let's just put them on the board. And then what happens? Because conflict is suppressed as an option to actively disagree, you have bad ideas on the board. number one. You have most ideas coming from a few select people who tend to talk a lot, to be very extroverted. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's, the point is that if you want to get diversity and as many perspectives as possible, you should encourage all team members to participate. And that means sometimes that, everyone needs to at least get the opportunity to speak their mind. And that can include disagreeing. And there's nothing wrong with that, with the disagreeing part. So that's just the first type of task where, I was thinking of like what tasks are particularly, strongly associated with conflict, albeit it's not a task that we tend to cognitively associate with conflict right away, right? If I say, think of a difficult interaction you've had at work, you probably won't think of brainstorming, but it is one of the tasks that comes up a lot, and explains so many decisions that are made in the end, because you go back and you're like, who proposed this to begin with? This is not a good idea. Why did we even consider this? And it's probably because a lot of people who wanted to actively speak up were discouraged from doing so, just in terms of the nature of the task. Yeah.
I'm going to take a slightly off route because I'm going to circle back to my original question actually, but in terms of brainstorming, so I was always taught to do brainstorming in a way that allows everybody to put ideas and thoughts down in a sort of a measured way. So I was taught, whether rightly or wrongly, that you would go around, get a load of ideas, share them, then go back and do another round, and then constantly feedback until you sort of build on each other's ideas. So it's more about shared learnings. Is that not a good approach? And if so, how would you recommend coming up with ideas?
And how are the ideas? Are you writing this down? Are you speaking this out loud?
Yeah, writing them down. Like you write them down, share them, go back to your thinking time, write them down again, share them again.
Yeah, so definitely the way to go is to write it down individually. And I believe we discussed that on another episode in the past, some experiments that were done in the 50s, 60s. So to write it down, which is anonymous also. And it doesn't have, so don't write down, John's ideas and then underline it and then write 1, 2, 3, but, just write them down without associating your name with it. And then they can all be, brought together. And yes, you could put them all up on the board if you like at that stage already. And then you could discuss and think about, okay, which ones of these not are most feasible, but which ones are least feasible? Like which ones we know that don't work, or we've tried them in the past and that's not really our strength. So we need to play to our strengths. So let's focus on, these other 3 instead of the first 3. So, and then you could go back and, if you have the time, that is, to actually think about this on an individual basis. And then you can maybe make a selection or rank them individually. And then you can, again, collect that information, combine it, and see, okay, what's the number 1 ranked idea or option that we should consider. You could do that. And I think that's very much a good approach, a feasible approach. But the key component here is there's different variations that you could do, but the key component would certainly be to write it down individually, anonymously, because even when you write it down, if it's associated with your name, a lot of people might feel like, well, I don't want to say anything that I know the group will go against and the group will disagree. So I'm not going to put that down, even though you're writing it. So anonymously, doing it anonymous, and it's very easy, right? I mean, you can do it digitally, or you can do it in the form of anonymous survey, or you can do it in a piece of paper if you're meeting in person. So it's really like low tech solution here, but it does work quite well.
Jar in the middle, post-it notes in the jar, and then read them out. I'm guessing.
You could do that as well, yeah.
Going definitely old school.
Yeah.
So, and you're right. You said interesting comment. So you did say that brainstorming is not something we would normally associate with conflict. I wouldn't have said that brainstorming is a conflict exercise, and I wouldn't have any kind of fear about going into a brainstorming conversation. So why is it there's certain types of conflict you get that feeling in your stomach, or you get more worried about than others, even,
Right. I think what's important to distinguish here is that to you, it's not, to me neither, it's not something I would associate with conflict, but I do know that it can be for a lot of people. And those are the individuals that might be a bit less extroverted and, less, a bit more afraid to speak up and to actively disagree. They are very likely to be the people who will agree with you, who generally will agree with you when they think that you're onto something. And you do need their support as well, of course. But it is mostly a matter of, why is conflict bad? Why do we cringe a little bit when we think about conflict, and why do we hesitate to have to deal with, to interact with that one team member who, we might have had conflict in the past? And, because conflict doesn't make us feel good, right? It makes us feel negative emotions, anxiety, fear, but also could be other things like anger, just feeling that you're not reassured when you're talking to certain members in your team, perhaps, and that can be really debilitating. So we don't want to feel that way. We want to, feel like this image that we have in our minds of our ideal self, and we want to portray that ideal self, of course, so especially in a professional working environment. So this is only natural to feel that, well, here is something that I know doesn't make me feel good because it hasn't made me feel good in the past. And so, of course, it's not the natural inclination for people to fully embrace conflict and to be all about it, and that's why it's so important that the leader sets the tone from the very beginning, that, this is a room where we can share ideas, and you're expected to share whatever you think is best, even though you can disagree with the team. And, to make it easier for people, have them write down ideas, for example, or even have them write down why they think, option A or option B is the best. And then you just have two piles of arguments, and you can weigh them against each other. So, those are ways of trying to maybe not fully embrace conflict, but at the very least to cope with it and to deal with it in a more structured manner. So take away that anxiety and that uncertainty, because another reason why conflict doesn't make us feel good is because anything can happen. Like someone might start yelling, or I don't know. I mean, it could go further than that. They might start throwing a chair or something. I mean, maybe that's too much.
What kind of organisations have you worked for, Jon?
It does work. Well, the stories that people tell are really illuminating in terms of what kind of people are in these leadership positions in these companies that we know very well. In terms of a brand name, and how come that is. I mean, it's not encouraged, obviously. I don't think it's actively encouraged, but it is allowed. It is tolerated that, okay, so this individual, this particular leader of a team, department, company CEO has a history of interacting with team members in a not so, professional manner, meaning maybe there's some yelling or there's some things that are, profanity in the office as well. Actually writing a paper on that with a colleague right now. So there's many things that people might or might not find acceptable, but the list is much longer in terms of what's tolerable, like what, this person performs, this person is good at what they do, so we're going to forgive the other behaviors that they exhibit. And most of the time, of course, as we can all imagine, I'm talking about male leaders, I'm talking about men, right? So they're mostly the ones to engage in those types of really abrupt public display of negative emotion, which doesn't necessarily mean that female leaders do not engage in that. Of course, they can, but it's just much less the case in terms of how that emotion is portrayed.
And that's a really interesting topic. So do men and women, obviously there's obviously exceptions to the rule, do they approach conflict in different ways?
Yes, I do think that so yes, the short answer is yes. So I would say that for men, it's particularly common when someone comes to you, a team member comes to you and has something to share, you immediately jump into how do we fix this? So this fixing mentality, like let's find a solution. Whereas in real life, many times when a team member comes to you and tell you what has happened, for example, they were confronted with some sort of decision they had to make, and they made a decision, and this was the outcome. You jump into how do we fix this? But wait, maybe it doesn't even need fixing. So you sometimes create a conflict where there wasn't one. Like in your head, it's a conflict, it's something that needs to be solved. But in reality, it's actually, they already went through that. They already decided, they made a decision, and they're just telling you about it, that this is what happened. So just so you know, so you're informed. So I do think men are more likely to jump the gun there, and you basically just jump in and say, okay, how do we fix this? And that is, I think the mentality is also that men look at conflict as, something negative, something that needs to be dealt with, and needs to be dealt with right away, immediately, and most likely involving some sort of abrupt behavior that, we need to deal with it right now, and create a sense of urgency. And that is almost never required. And it's almost never required that you immediately deal with something right away. Now, of course, there can be those cases, and I'm certain that if you're in the hospital and your surgeon has to operate on you, you would prefer for them to operate on you right away instead of waiting and maybe looking at different options. But the vast majority of the time, if we're not talking about these really emergency situations, it's not needed that you jump in right away and try to deal with it, and sort everything out in one go. To take the time to take a step back. It's very, very difficult to not disassociate ourselves from negative emotions that conflict brings about, but to accept them, to realize that these are normal, that everyone is feeling some sort of emotion. It could be fear, panic, or it could be just anxiety, just uncertainty, or it could be anger that something was done that was not according to the way we do things. And as a leader, you might be angry about it. And it's okay to have that emotion. It's totally fine to have that emotion. To think about the other person's probably thinking or experiencing, rather not thinking, experiencing a similar emotion. We need to be more accepting of ourselves and of other people. And that hopefully will allow us to take a step back and to think of conflict not as something that, how do we solve this right now, but how can we use this as fuel for solving issues in the future? So how can we learn to cope with conflict in a more structured way? That there are also some tangible learnings there for our team and also for other teams in the organization as well. I mean, codifying this type of knowledge, which is essentially what it is really extremely difficult. But it is so important that leaders, especially after you've completed a group project, you've finished, you've delivered, whatever you were working on to the client, things have gone well, to take the time to reflect and take the time to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, not with everyone else in the team, but just for yourself, first of all, as a leader. And that is really expected of you as well. At the very least, it should be, that you then try to codify those experiences into tangible learnings that other teams might benefit from, that you certainly will benefit from as well. You have other teams in the future, new teams will be formed and so on. But that is something that, to take the time in a very busy world and days that we all live through, right? It's difficult to do, but it really can have huge payoffs long term.
And you talk obviously about taking a step back to assess the situation in terms of that conflict. But is there a way of structuring the way you deal with that conflict to minimize, like you say, I think escalation is the right word, the escalation into an unhealthy behavior, so that we keep conflict. So just say the outcome is there's two individuals within your team, both have differing views about how you should move forwards, and you're the tiebreaker as the manager or leader, right? So, or you kind of want to bring them on board, you want them to both agree or at least come to some agreement around that. How would you approach that and manage that in a way that makes both of them feel like they've been heard, and that it's been addressed in a way that gets the most positive outcome possible?
Yeah, I think this will involve a combination of a few things. So one is what we spoke about earlier, which is like setting the tone, and during the team meeting with other people present as well, other team members. I mean, you set the tone and you say, this is the task and this is the assignment, that we have to work on, and this is the deliverable that the client wants, right? And then you have inevitably some sort of disagreement. At the very least, I would argue you should. And then now the question is, okay, so how do we do about this? If it becomes clear that after you've gone through various options, you've weighed arguments, and other team members have taken a side, so they've decided either A or B, and these two individuals in your team still seem to be butting heads, then it might be a good time for a break, and then a series of one-on-one conversations with each of them. Not to scold them or anything like that, but just to make them, like you said, Hannah, to make them feel like they've been heard, and to tell them that whatever decision that we take as a team, I need you to stand behind it. I need you to be okay with it, and I don't want you to feel like you have to suppress your emotions, or you have to suppress your disagreement going forward. Or rather, I would quite the opposite. I would encourage you to continue and to voice your disagreement whenever it is you feel that it is relevant and appropriate, in a professional manner, of course. So that way, at the very least, you can assure that they feel they've been heard. They have had a chance to pitch, let's say, whatever feelings or concerns they might have had one-on-one with you. And the other, both of them know this. Both of them know that you're going to have one-on-one talks with them. And if you, as a leader or as a group, decide that we need to go with option A, it just makes most sense right now. At that stage, you have already engaged with them. They've already been heard. It's already been processed emotionally as well to some degree. It's very unlikely going to lead to this escalation that you mentioned earlier, because we already talked about this. So it's not going to be like, ooh, surprise, we're not going to go with what you think because your idea sucks, but rather we've had a conversation, like you've had a chance to voice your concerns, and I've taken it on board, and truly taken it on board, and genuinely considered it. And for these reasons, we decided to go with the other option. That's really important, that people feel heard, people feel that their presence and their thoughts matter. Because if you do this a few times without consulting with them one-on-one, what's going to happen is one or the other, or both, over time, will think that it doesn't really matter what I say. They're going to make a decision on, whatever they want, and it doesn't matter what I say, so I'm not going to say anything anymore. And I'm just going to disengage from whenever we do this type of activity, clearly it doesn't matter what I think. Why should I care? Yeah, let's go with whatever you think is best. And that potentially can work for some time, as in nothing will explode, or nothing will blow up in any way. But it can only lead to a deterioration in terms of, this is not going to be the best possible solution or decision you could have taken as a team. And you're not going to be a high-performing team over a long term. I mean, we need to realize a couple of things. Even bad teams can make good decisions. Okay, right? It happens. It's mostly called luck. So even when you disagree, but you don't say anything, you're like, yeah, whatever, just do whatever you think is best. That can still be a good decision. I'm not saying that it's always going to be a wrong one. No, people could have weighted option A and B, and due to a matter of resources, chose A instead of B, because B involves more strategic management, more finding resource allocating, too much work. Let's just go with A. It could have actually turned out to be the best decision. But those are isolated cases. If you take a long-term perspective, a year, 2 years, 5 years, if you look back, it's just not going to happen. And then the other thing is, good teams can make bad decisions also. So even when you have team members who are really committed, who understand what conflict means and how they should embrace it, and they fully do so, and you decide on something, on how to move forward, that still could prove to be wrong in the long term. But that's the risk you have to take. So in terms of probabilities, I mean, this is what I tell my students all the time, it's all about, life is about probabilities, right? Nothing is certain or uncertain except for death and taxes, right? So we need to make sure that we have the probability in our favor. So what can we do to maximize the chance that we make consistently good decisions in this team? That is your goal as a leader. That should be your goal. The goal should not be to make the best decisions all the time. That's not a goal that's really achievable, because life happens and situational factors occur, and you could have planned to expand your company to 3 different geographical regions in the beginning of 2020, and then we all know what happened. So these are things that are outside of your control. So instead of taking that approach, don't go for perfection, but strive for excellence. So try to do what you can continuously over time to foster an environment which is supportive, foster an environment where people genuinely feel heard and feel that their presence matters, that their presence and their disagreement, that includes their presence, right? In my presence, I can disagree on something, is also taken into account. And that's really all you can do. And then the decision that is taken as a team should be really as a team. You're not going to make people, not everyone will be happy all the time. That's not going to happen. It's a team. And the larger the team, the more compromises and the less contentment you will have as a result, because you're trying to make different people, keep them relatively happy with moving forward with whatever decision you have decided. So these are issues, these are struggles, but you can only do so much. And these are some of the things you can do. So as long as you do these aspects, I think you're on the right track as a leader.
So that statement, almost that goal that you should have as a leader to make the best decision possible given the circumstances. Now that's a really great goal. So you've obviously mentioned avoiding groupthink. So not allowing groupthink to impact the validity of the decisions that you're making. You've mentioned making sure that people feel like they can be heard and that their voices matter and their thoughts and ideas matter is really important to make sure they continue to speak up and add value to the conversation. Is there anything else that you need in place to be able to make good decisions or to minimize the potential for making bad decisions?
Escalation of commitment.
Okay.
So escalation of commitment is you've made a decision based on available information at the time one, T1. Let's assume it was a good decision, okay? So there's nothing wrong with a decision like based on the information that you had. Time goes by, you start getting in new information. Could be something as simple as client feedback on, how the project is going. And you, instead of shifting course and saying, okay, so let's take this feedback on board and let's move into that direction, which is slightly different than the decision we had set up, to engage with at the very beginning. You keep going. And you keep going because of a variety of reasons. One of them is that you don't want to admit to yourself that you were wrong. Mm-hmm. You don't want to show the other person that you were wrong, like a client. Because we are very afraid of losing anything. Loss aversion is a very real phenomenon. So we don't want to admit that we're wrong. We don't want to show the other person that, look here, I messed up. That was not the right decision. And when I say I mean we. Okay, it goes both on an individual and a team basis. And you don't want to you want to make sure you keep believing this ideal self image that you have, right? So ideal self doesn't make mistakes. And so we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep investing. For example, so investments are a good example here. I used to do this when, teaching MBA students, there's this case study and it's very simple. Like I put people in groups and I tell them you're a finance department of a company. Here's your case. And the case is very simple. Is the company has decided to provide on company grounds, a creche or like a daycare for the employees. And what we'll do is we'll play rounds. Every round is a month. In real life, it's 5 minutes. So we'll play this for 12 months for 1 hour. Every 5 minutes, you'll be asked to make a very easy decision. I mean, very easy as in simplistic. Continue investing in the daycare center or stop investing in the daycare center. You only have 2 options. It's not about the amount or anything. It's very, very, very simplified. The main point of this, let's call it experiment, is to look at how many teams, let's say you have 100 teams that are playing this all in real time next to each other, right? how many teams will keep going? And what happens is every month they get information. Every month they get a piece of paper that has a table, how many kids are still attending, how much money is this thing making, and how much money is it costing us. And the question is very simple. How many teams will keep going? The information is consistent. Every month the daycare makes a loss. Every month it costs you more to keep it running. You don't really know why, there's very little information, a piece of paper, but you see that the number of children is dropping, and you see the cost per child are increasing, obviously, because you have less children. How many teams keep going in percentage? It's around 65%.
Wow.
They keep going. Every month, every 5 minutes, they say, yeah, well, let's keep going. Let's keep going. And then you ask them, right? You ask them after an hour, because some of them stop. Some of them, like one quarter over, like, it's ridiculous. Like, this makes no sense. They're going to stop it. And, and they come up with other ways. They give parents, first of all, it's only parents will care about this, right? Number one, which most people don't tend to think about. It's like, okay, how many parents do we employ? Like, what's the percentage of the overall workforce? So, like, does it make sense? And then, so, if you're not a parent, obviously, why are we paying for our daycare? So that's the number one thing that teams that stop investing, think about. The other thing is we can do something else. We can give them some sort of give all parents a credit to go, like an extra cash payment or something, and then they can use that to go to a daycare down the street, to another daycare. So, but that's not really so interesting. What is more interesting is that what about the teams that keep going? Why in the world would you keep going? Every month you're being told this is wrong. Why do you keep going? Well, it's for the kids. Well, we want to do right by our employees. Well, we start, and I remember still, this was years ago, one of them actually said it. Well, we committed to this, so we had to see it through. Right. But you don't. You don't have to see it through, right? You can stop. And I mean, there's many examples, individual and team basis, and even on a larger scale, right? I mean, if you look at war, if a country decides to go to war, that's a commitment, right? Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to start a war. It's very difficult to get out of a war. And we saw what happened in Afghanistan last year. You can't just, let's call it quits here. It's very difficult to get out of it because you've committed. And now you not only have you lost money, which is, okay, it's fine, it's just money. You've lost time. You've lost human lives. You can't get that back. That's not coming back. Right? So obviously it doesn't have to be that drastic for a company, but it can be. It can certainly be that drastic. These are some things that we need to not just think about, but we need to be aware of in the moment that we can stop. We have the right to stop. It doesn't matter so much what do other people think. Why do people? What will they think of us? But what is more important is how do we conserve value here? How do we make sure that what comes out of this in the end is actually, what the client wants, is actually what makes sense, what is the best possible. And if you realize that a decision you made with the information you had available at the beginning, that was the right decision, right? That's what I said, assuming you made the right decision. It doesn't need to be the right decision the week after, 2 weeks after, 4 weeks after, 3 months after, a year after. It doesn't, because you get new information. Use that new information. Don't be afraid to use it. And unfortunately, we are afraid of this. A story that I tell my students on this, because individual example I said earlier as well, it's not just teams, relationships, right? So I had a friend of a friend of mine that was telling me, so he was telling me about this friend, and it's this academic conference we meet every year. So he would meet his colleague every year from overseas. And every year he was telling me he will be complaining about his girlfriend. Year on year on year, like she doesn't go out for drinks with my friends, she chores around the house, whatever it is. And then at some point, a few years ago, he met him again and he asked him, "How are you? How's your girlfriend?" And the friend said, "Oh, we got married actually." And my friend asked, "Well, how come? Like for 7 years you've been complaining." "Well, we have been together for 7 years, so I thought it was time." Because this is a real life case. Like, okay, you are investing money. Okay, you're investing time. 7 years is a long time. But also you're investing a lot of, emotions, obviously. So a lot of feelings. And then the question is, why did you not stop? Like, why did you not, both of you must have realized after so much time that this is not working. Well, what will her parents think? What will my parents think? What will our friends think? Right? So, these are not reasons to stay together, okay? Let me be very frank about this. But this is what people tell themselves. So people will tell themselves whatever it is that they need to tell themselves to justify that the decision that they made 7 years ago is still the right decision today. But it doesn't have to be. And the same thing with investments, the same thing with anything that, requires us to make a decision today and then to see it through. But you decide when that through ends, right? So that is in our control.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because that can sometimes be the challenge with people. Not you, if you have that mindset, brilliant, but your team may not have that mindset. They may think that because I wanted to do this thing at the beginning, I should still want to do it, because otherwise that would mean admitting I'm wrong or admitting that it wasn't the right decision to make potentially. Yeah. So how do
you're inconsistent? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage that with your team?
I think it's just brute force. So basically, they need to go through it a few times. And so you can say, look, this is what I meant. Like, we made a decision, you argued for it, we decided to go with your decision, like with what you had proposed. But look here, this is the information we're getting. It's not working, or it's not working as we expected. We need to adjust. And it's okay to adjust. Like, I won't see you any differently because of it, but you need to go through it. I don't think that, intellectually we're all like nodding along. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I know a lot of people like this. But the problem is we are people, all of us. We've all made this, we've all gone through this, at least a few times in our professional lives. And the only way we learn from it is through going through it and, hurting a little bit, like realizing that that was not right. I shouldn't have, suggest. But that's okay. It's not the end of the world, okay? And that's what employees and leaders, especially, because they're the ones that have to take responsibility and show them, like, look, this is okay. And this can happen to anyone. It's not about you being right or being wrong. If you think about taking the relationships example, like if you want to bet on relationships, which I don't encourage either, but to say, okay, well, this won't last. But you can say that about pretty much any relationship, because more than 50% of the time, you're going to be right if you look at divorce rates, right? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get into a relationship. That's beside the point. You're completely missing the point. So it's not about not making mistakes, but it's about making them and learning from them and adjusting so that they don't become bigger mistakes. Then you don't become, a war you can get out of, or it won't become a 7-year relationship where you're both miserable. And relationships, you can be committed to an organization with a very toxic environment, like toxic working environment. But they gave me the first job after I graduated, and so I owe my leader a lot, and they're still around, and so those are not reasons to keep going. All right, people do it. I'm not saying there's no evidence. There's plenty of evidence that people keep going in jobs they feel they're absolutely miserable in. But that's not a right reason to keep going. That's not a reason at all. That's actually a reason to stop, to reevaluate, use new information that you have available to you now that you didn't have when you first started, and make changes. Make changes doesn't necessarily mean leave the organization, but at least leave the team. Right? Ask for job rotation. Ask for something that gets you into a different working environment.
So that's very much if you've made a decision, you feel like you have to stick with it. How do you handle the scenario whereby a person doesn't agree with the decision that you've made? And I've seen this a lot in change projects, and they subconsciously or consciously try to find more reasons to make that decision a bad one because they still don't believe it was the right one in the first place. I don't like to use the term sabotage, but that's sometimes what it can feel like as you go through a project, is that they're actively looking for ways for that project to not work, is what it feels like. Whether they are or not is a different story.
Yeah, difficult to prove,
Yeah.
Right, so this is why I always say behavior is complex. And it would be simple, I'd be out of a job. So it's very, there's a lot of factors here, right? So we've talked a lot about how to make decisions and how to work together in teams and so on to more effectively. But you have to be fully aware of the fact that trust I was saying at the beginning as a foundation, some people might not care about that so much. Let me put it that way. So some people will actively, like you said, Hannah, sabotage or manipulate, if you like that word better, I don't know, the evidence, or so they might even fabricate evidence to convince you that this is not right, and you should really go with what they suggest, that's what this is about. It's not really about proving you wrong, but it's about proving them right, which sometimes can be the same thing. And there's plenty of cases where, especially in manager-led teams, which is the vast majority of teams, you have a team member who's actively trying to see the team leader fail because they want their job. So, like, what's going to happen if I can do it so that this project fails, the client is not happy, and keep the blame away from myself as much as possible, then who's going to get the blame? It's always going to be the team leader. But if I have to be very careful in how I manipulate things and coerce other people into taking my side over the team leader so that we don't get blamed as a team, because then you have no team to lead, right? If everyone's against you, then you've won nothing, basically. You've conquered a city that's been burnt down to the ground, so that's useless. So you want to make it so that the team leader gets blamed. They're out of that leadership position, and now you're in charge. And now you have access to more resources, you have access to, insights that you didn't have previously, and so on. You have more authority, people are more likely to do what you say. So these are certainly aspects that are all around us, or at least they can be. So luckily, the vast majority of people are not like this, but there are some that are. And it is important to find, especially when you're new to a company, if you're a new leader or if you're new to the team, to find what are called advice ties. So ties with people that can give you advice on how things work around here, who to be careful of, like who to be aware of, and you just be critical of, like when they speak, like they might have a different agenda. Obviously, having just one person tell you this is not going to be enough, because that person might be the person that's trying to manipulate you. You need several people like this. You need to engage with people, interact with them, and take them out to lunch, just to meet them, because you're new, right? Or they might be new. Whenever they are new to the organization, meet with them so that you can relay some information to them as well, and make them feel welcome, but also look here, this is also what you should know. Or not to present it, and not to present anyone in a bad light, but to say that, during the last project, this is what happened, right? And during another project, maybe even before your time, I was told that this is what happened with this particular leader or employee or client, maybe as well. So that is information that's difficult to get, but it is really important that you are aware of it. I think that's the most impactful thing you can do. So just to have thought about it before going into interaction or new organization in your team, and then to try to make friends, essentially, but professional friends. So not friends that, again, you would trust your kids with for the afternoon, but, friends as in people that are positively inclined to you, that happy to share information with you, and that's information that's going to be really valuable in trying to help you assess, how to navigate and how to direct your team.
So as part of your conflict, you're addressing conflict or making good decisions is about understanding the team's motivation, whether that's positive or negative, and understanding, like you say, the divides and the ties. Where is there previous behaviours that perhaps haven't been as healthy as they should be, and what might be influencing the behaviour that you're seeing in that room at that time?
Yeah, and I mean, now we're down a different track, which is research that I do on like dark triad traits, Like people like this that I was mentioning, like that you suggested, sabotage and so on. That sounds quite Machiavellian. It might be narcissistic, might be psychopathic even. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of research on that as it pertains to leaders, because leaders tend to be, unfortunately, many times our leaders are not the leaders, not the people that are the best representation of the community, that don't really want to be there, but are there because they represent the community and they're there to serve others as servant leader, but rather they're there because they're driven by individual motives. So I want power, I want authority, I want status. How do I get it? By becoming a leader. So that's really what I care about. I don't really care about the community I'm representing. But this very much, this is an individual difference. This is applicable to anyone. So we all score, somewhere on that spectrum of narcissistic, Machiavellian, psychopathic, and luckily most of us don't score very high on it. And that's why these cases are quite isolated, but they are prevalent. They are in any organization, and it's just a matter of time that before you encounter someone like this, if you haven't already. So I don't intend to scare my 18, 20-year-old students with this, but this is something that they very much need to know about, because if I talk to executives, they're the ones telling me the stories. I don't need to tell them that this is what's happening. They're like, no, I know this is what's happening. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember whether there was a study or something I read about the prevalence of narcissism and psychopathic behavior in executives at C-suite level.
Psychopathic.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Study, that was a book called Snakes in Suits. I don't remember. Bellback, I think, was the one who wrote it, but I might be wrong. I read it a long time ago. And there's been a lot of research on these dark traits and why, because they're so relevant when it comes to, especially working in teams, where you have not just, we're not just a collection of people that are driven by what's best for the team, but don't forget these are individuals. They also care about what's best for them. And sometimes, you should never make that assumption as a leader that your individual goals are aligned with the team goals, or even worse, with the organizational goals. Even worse, because it's a more macro level. So individual goals, very micro, and then we're moving to team, dyadic, team level, and then macro level. So it's very unlikely that the vast majority of employees are fully aligned with organizational values at all times. It's almost impossible, especially as an organization grows. But it doesn't even have to be that complicated. Just stick to the team level, and it already is complex enough. So.
Brilliant. And as usual, right, we've run out of time again we keep doing this, and I keep using it as a great excuse to get you back on again, Jon. So if we just sum up perhaps the key components of making good decisions, how would you sum up the key attributes or elements of good decision making?
Right. So the first one that we discussed, I believe, was creating an environment where conflict is something that is even encouraged, goes so far as to say encouraged, to realize that most conflict is task conflict, which means that people actively disagreeing is a good thing. And for you as a leader, you're the one that has to, make sure that gets implemented. That is your responsibility. So to create that type of environment first. Also, in terms of getting people on board, having those one-on-ones are really, really crucial. Don't, just sometimes in terms of the speed of things, we need to make decisions quickly. We cannot take people's feelings into account and so on. But that's going to come back, to bite you at some point. So do take the time, have at least one-on-one with those two individuals who might be, going against each other in terms of their ideas, and really try to set the tone from the very beginning, and also to make sure that you take on board new information as it comes along. Don't just stick with a decision that you made. Keep thinking that you have to stick it through. You have to stick it out. No, you don't have to. you can stop, and you should stop many times in order to preserve value for your team and for your clients and for yourself, frankly. Mental clarity on things is very important as well. So make sure that escalation commitment is minimized, and never assume that individual motives are aligned with team motives at all times. So be aware of people that might be trying to, let's say, not do what is absolutely best for the team at all times. And we all have a personal agenda, but most of the time it is in alignment with the team, because if the team does well, I do well, usually, more promotion, things like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always like this for everybody. So try to get information, try to make connections with people who've been there longer than you, try to meet new people as they come into your team. Not only does it show that you value them, that you welcome them, but also information they might be impossible to get to otherwise is also communicated to them.
A fantastic summary. I think you literally covered our hours podcast in a few short minutes there.
I hope I didn't miss anything. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, if you're listening to this and you have a question particularly around behaviour, around how we manage change, how we lead during change, then as our listeners, if you have questions, do reach out. I'm happy to be guided by you. And I want to say thank you again to Jon for coming back on, because it's always really insightful having you on, talking about the science behind leadership, behind change, and behind behaviour. So thank you, Jon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Hannah. Yeah, pleasure to be here, and who knows, we might do this again at some point.
Let's hope so.
Let's see, yeah. All right. Thanks so much.